In every RPG I play, I always end up playing a damage over time mage at some point, and Destiny is no exception. Here, I've got a build that I've been working on off and on for a while, where I stack up to 7 damage over time effects on enemies, just rotating through them on crowds or stacking as many as I can on the single target enemies, and it's pretty effective. This is of course a Prismatic Warlock build, but you can see it gives a lot of ability spam, a lot of good damage, a lot of good control, and it's just fun to play because you can really just fire off some damage over time and kind of forget about some enemies and let it take care of them for you. It's very versatile. It works in endgame content because the damage over time will chip away at things and wear them down. It uses every ability in your kit, and it's also just really fun to optimize. This build is what I call the Blight Warlock. And today I'm just going to describe all of it to you and also give you the tools so that you can create your perfect version of the Blight Warlock. I'm Engineer. Let's get into the build. So, I'm going to go through a bunch of things, and at the end I'm going to kind of summarize all the damage over time effects that we're getting and how they can kind of work together more, but I'll be going through a lot of different effects. Just as a summary though, we're going to be trying to get Poison, Unravel, Jolt, Scorch, Volatile, some Area Denial, Grenade Launcher damage over time, and then some kind of extra damage over time effect on top of that. That's our goal, 7 damage over time effects. And a big key of this is we are going to use the exotic Necrotic Grips, because it's a great exotic, it gives you a unique poison effect, and it's one of the only ones you can get from your armor pieces. To get this, you need to have Beyond Light, and you can either get it from Rahul's Precision Focusing or Vex Strike Force. Stat priorities, pretty flexible here. We're going to be using a lot of abilities. Obviously focus on resilience, discipline's really great, recovery's good. Strength is also pretty decent in this because we're going to be using our melee so much. And then intellect's kind of our last fallback, and mobility we're dumping because we're on Warlock. I want to talk more about Necrotic Poison because it's a very unique effect, and also just talk about Necrotic Grip versus the Spirit of the Necrotic from the exotic class item, because this is a prismatic build, so that is an option here. A few things here. Poison damage does not count as melee damage. Poison damage is kinetic damage and will fill both your light and dark transcendent gauges slowly. Freeze will cancel out poison. Song of Flame melees will actually use the poison, which is why we're going to take that super, because it's the only one that synergizes with the Necrotic Poison. In general, unique damage over time effects will all stack. If you have the same damage over time source from different teammates, those do not stack. Now, the reason we take Necrotic Grip over Spirit of Necrotic is, as you look here in the description from the Destiny Data Compendium, which I will link in the description, the damage will scale up over time every time it ticks, which is just really strong and increases the damage considerably, whereas in Spirit of the Necrotic from the exotic class item, the damage does not scale up over time. So it's okay. And really, the big disadvantage is that there's not a really great perk to pair with Spirit of the Necrotic, so that's where we're just going to stick with Necrotic Grip, and it's also just easier to get. Over to our aspects and abilities, we want to take Feed the Void. It's the best aspect on Prismatic Warlock, so we're going to take it because it gives us more uptime on grenades, and it also gives us more survivability. For aspect 2, you have 2 real options here. Hellion is really solid, gives you Scorch, gives you a great little fire turret. Alternatively, Lightning Surge can be fun, works pretty well. The Lightning Surge attack will also proc the poison, so you get Jolt and Poison in one attack, but it puts you up close, and Jolt's one of the effects that's actually kind of easy to get, and one of the easiest ones to get from grenades, so that's why we don't necessarily want to take that. Super, mentioned before, Song of Flame is obviously our selection here. The melee's proc Necrotic Grips, and that's great. It increases the damage pretty considerably, and you can really just keep spamming the melee, which makes that kind of fit with this particular build. On the grenade, I would take Storm Grenade because you can get Jolt from that, but if you're on Lightning Surge, then maybe switch over to Vortex. And keep in mind too, when you're in Transcendence, you will get a unique Prismatic Grenade. It's kind of like a Vortex Grenade with some slowing and some void damage, which can also be given weakening. For the melee, we're going to take Arcane Needle. It's Unravel, and it is 3 charges, which is just really fantastic. Class ability, always flexible, but I recommend Phoenix Dive for the short cooldown so we can keep Hellion up even more often. Over to the Fragments, we're going to take Faceted Balance because it'll give us more ability spam as we're getting those rapid kills. We're slinging a lot of abilities out, so that just helps. Faceted Protection will give us defenses when we're surrounded. Dominance we're taking so that Storm Grenade jolts, and it will also make our Transcendence Grenade weaken. So just really great double effect, especially on Warlocks here. Courage is a really great effect that will increase the damage of your light abilities, including your Song of Flame. So if you manage to throw out one of your Arcane Needles for Unravel, everything that's getting hit by it's going to take 10% increased damage from your super, and that is just a fantastic thing. Beyond that, I recommend taking Sacrifice and or Devotion if you want to replace one of these other fragments, because those will help build your Transcendence meter more, which really lets us spam abilities even more and get those damage over time effects out more often. If for some reason you don't have any trouble with Transcendence meter, or you want a little bit more survivability, take Faceted Purpose. That'll give you Restoration when you pick up orbs, give you just a little bit of extra healing for survival. Moving over to mods and armor stats. The mods are pretty straightforward. We're really just focused on ability energy, so I'm using some font mods here. I'm using Ashes to Assets because we'll get some grenade kills. I'm using Siphon to make some orbs, and then we're using those orbs to get grenade energy, a little bit of all ability energy, and whatever's lowest back with Orbs of Restoration. A smattering of stuff here, but we need just so many different stats that the font mods really help here to kind of keep everything boosted. Now on those stats, we're going to focus on resilience. We're going to keep discipline high. Try and get strength like up to 6 or 7 if you're using Font of Vigor, which will give it an extra 30. Get as much recovery as you can manage, and you can boost that a little bit more with Font of Recovery. Then as always, just try and get about 30 in intellect. Moving over to weapons. Weapons are very critical in this build because that's going to be the source of 3 of our damage over time effects. So one of the biggest things here are area denial grenade launchers. We have 2 right now. We have Lost Signal from Episode Echoes, which is Stasis. And then we have VS Velocity Baton from Vesper's Host, the newest dungeon, which is Void. Those are 2 different air denial frames, so you can use both of them on the same enemy, and they both will do damage over time. But if you and an ally are using the same weapon, those damage over time effects will not stack, so keep that in mind. If for some reason you don't have these, there's also Wither Horde, which is an exotic, kind of the original air denial grenade launcher, and that's pretty great too. I've also gone through and just listed here some of the seasonal champion counters here, because if you're taking this in an endgame activity, you want to keep those in mind. Fortunately, grenade launchers are natural overload counters this episode, so that's pretty great. A few other things just to mention here. The stabilizing rounds from any Void primary, jolting feedback from any Arc primary are really good to get those effects. The one effect that's kind of the hardest for us to get is the stabilizing rounds, or volatile. There's one way to get it with Faceted Bravery through Fragments, but you have to reliably get grenade kills and then you get a small window for it. So really destabilizing rounds is going to be a better way to go about it. Jolting feedback we don't necessarily use because we have storm grenades, but it's a good fallback if for some reason you're switching up your loadout. Now, in the heavy slot, we actually have a few great options. The first is Anarchy, which is an old raid heavy grenade launcher, a raid that's no longer in the game, but you can get it from the kiosk if you have enough Oils of Conquest. But it has a unique special damage over time effect because when you fire 2 grenades, it makes an electric tether between them. Put that on a boss, it's extra damage over time. It stacks with everything, which is really great. Don't have that? Another good option is Deterministic Chaos. It is a Void machine gun that inflicts volatile every 4 shots, so that's a pretty good way to get that. Another one is Leviathan's Breath, which is a Shadowkeep exotic that you can also get from the kiosk. It is a heavy bow that applies volatile. But this bow is pretty underwhelming unless you have the catalyst, because the charge time is just very, very long. I have of course made a spreadsheet to do this because it is how I had to think through it, and it's how I work as an engineer. So I will link that in the description. But here's a couple tables of different damage over time sources you can stack. So generally, we're going to get Poison from our exotic armor. We're going to get Scorch from Helion, which is one of our aspects. We're going to get Jolt from our grenade, Storm Grenade. We're going to get Unravel from Arcane Needle. Those 4 are kind of the basis of this, and then beyond that, my general play is using Lost Signal, which is the Air Denial Stasis, using a Void primary with Volatile through destabilizing rounds to get that. And then in the heavy slot, I'm going to use Anarchy for that extra unique tether. That gives us 7 damage over time effects and only 1 exotic, just to make sure. I have a check built in there for that. Now, another thing I did a run of Garden of Salvation yesterday, and I tried this loadout out, so I did a couple things. I switched my kinetic energy slot to a sniper with kinetic tremors to get some damage there. Used VS Velocity Baton, running double special, and then I took Leviathan's Breath so I could get some good damage in and add that volatile effect in. Still hitting 7 dots. Lots of different ways you can go about it. Technically, you could get up to 8 damage over time effects, but you'd probably have to drop Devour, or you could use a weapon like Le Monarch, which has a unique poison effect and is also void, so you can get volatile on it too if you use Faceted Bravery. there's a few different ways here. If you have great ideas, definitely leave them in the comments, but just trying to give you some examples and some different situations that might work for you. Now, I want to show you a little bit of gameplay from one of the recent GMs, Birthplace of the Vile. This is GM difficulty, and this is kind of the tunnel portion near the beginning of it, but you can kind of see enemies are just running up. Air denial is really great for locking down areas. It just keeps some damage, slows the enemies down, kind of whittle them away, especially once you start stacking other effects on top of it. Fortunately, Overload Grenade Launcher here is just really great for these Overload champions, so they just keep getting stunned, and they're just taking consistent damage, so not much you can deal with. The Bane here is actually probably the most difficult thing I dealt with, but you can see it's just constantly getting stun locked by everything hitting it, and the weakening effects of the grenade launchers, because this season you can weaken with grenade launchers for stronger enemies. We have one more overload here that we're just having to deal with. Easy to stun, throwing out poison, throwing out storm grenade, keeping the air denial up, then using anarchy for these stronger targets just to whittle them down, reapplying effects as needed, and boom, that's already gone. Gonna run down here to another group, and it has like a little mini boss here if you're familiar with this, and an unstoppable champion. So we're going to throw some air denial. Our super got charged during that last fight, so we're just going to really empty out all of our effects and then just switch to super, and we're just going to put the poison on as many things as possible. And just for speed, I'm using the grenade here, but if you really want to stretch out the super as long as possible, just use the melee. It'll take a little bit longer to use, but you can apply a lot of poison and put a lot of damage all over the place. So that kind of wrapped up, and so then we're going to just stack anarchy on the boss, and just keep those damage over time, unravel, poison, storm grenade, and it's done. So just to summarize the gameplay loop, you're just rotating through those damage over time effects when you're in ad clear. Prioritize getting your Transcendence gauge up, because that's going to refill all your melees and let you throw those out pretty frequently and give you grenades. Use your Song of Flame for extra damage, or also keep in mind that that super has 90% damage resistance like most roaming supers do, so it's a great get out of danger card while also doing fantastic damage. In Song of Flame, try and prioritize that melee for the poison. Now as for bosses though, you want to drop your grenade, use your melees up, activate Transcendence for the 5% damage boost, as many weapon-based dots as possible during Transcendence, and Song of Flame as that's kind of winding down, or if you're out of abilities. And that's really all there is to it. Practice with it, try it out different ways. This is not a fixed build, there's different options. That's one of the good things about Prismatic. There's some things that are so good you should always take them, but there's always a lot of options and you can kind of fit it with your loadout. Definitely try out the tool and let me know if you have any questions or if you have any other suggestions. With that, I'm gonna let you go. Thanks for watching the build, and I appreciate all the support. Let me know if you have any questions or anything you wanna see, and I'll catch you with the next build.